The morning started like any other on the Colorado plains. Mary Rose stepped outside her small wooden cabin and breathed in the crisp autumn air. The sun was painting the endless grassland in shades of gold and amber. She could hear her husband, Jacob, chopping wood behind the barn, getting ready for the winter months ahead. Their 7-year-old daughter Annie was already outside, chasing butterflies through the tall grass with their old dog Rusty. Life wasn't easy out here, but it was theirs. They had built everything from scratch over the past 4 years. The cabin sat on a small hill overlooking their wheat field, which stretched as far as the eye could see. Jacob always said they were living the American dream, even though some days it felt more like survival. Mary Rose walked to the well to draw water for breakfast. The nearest neighbor was 15 miles away, and the closest town was a 2-day ride through rough country. But they had each other, and that was enough. Jacob was a strong man with gentle hands and a kind heart. He could fix anything that broke, and had taught Annie how to ride a horse before she could properly walk. As Mary Rose prepared breakfast, she noticed something strange. The wind was picking up, and it carried an odd smell. Not the usual scent of prairie grass and wildflowers, but something sharp and dangerous. She looked out the window and saw dark clouds gathering in the distance, but they weren't rain clouds. They were low and thick, moving fast across the land. Jacob came running toward the house, his face pale with worry. "Fire!" he shouted. "There's a fire coming from the south, and it's moving fast." Mary Rose felt her heart drop. Prairie fires were every settler's worst nightmare. With no trees or rivers to stop them, they could burn for days, destroying everything in their path. She grabbed Annie and held her close while Jacob quickly began gathering their most important belongings. "We need to get the animals to safety," Jacob said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "The fire's still miles away, but with this wind it'll be here before sunset." They had 12 cattle, 4 horses, and a small flock of chickens. These animals weren't just livestock, they were their lifeline. Without them, they couldn't survive the harsh winter that was coming. Jacob knew he had to try to save them, even if it meant risking his own life. Mary Rose packed food and water while Jacob prepared the wagon. Annie didn't fully understand what was happening, but she could feel the fear in the air. She stayed close to her mother, clutching her favorite doll that Jacob had carved for her last Christmas. The fire grew closer by the hour. What started as a dark line on the horizon became a wall of orange and red flames. The wind was getting stronger, pushing the fire forward like a hungry monster. Smoke began to fill the air, making it hard to breathe. "Take Annie and go to the creek," Jacob told his wife. "I'll try to move the cattle there. The water might protect us until the fire passes." Mary Rose wanted to argue, but she knew Jacob was right. Someone had to save the animals, and someone had to protect Annie. She kissed her husband goodbye, not knowing it would be the last time she would see him alive. The creek was about a mile from their cabin. Mary Rose carried Annie on her back and ran as fast as she could. The smoke was getting thicker, and she could hear the fire roaring in the distance like a freight train. When they reached the creek, she soaked their clothes in the cold water and waited for Jacob to arrive with the animals. Hours passed. The fire swept over their land like a red ocean, destroying everything they had built. The cabin, the barn, the wheat field, all gone in a matter of minutes. Mary Rose held Annie tight as they watched 4 years of hard work disappear in flames and smoke. When the fire finally passed, Jacob hadn't come back. Mary Rose left Annie by the creek and went looking for him. She found him near what used to be their barn, crushed under a fallen beam. He was still alive, but barely. The cattle had panicked when the fire got close, and in their fear they had stampeded. Jacob had been trying to guide them to safety when the barn collapsed. For 3 days, Mary Rose nursed her husband in the ruins of their home. She had no medicine, no proper shelter, and no way to get help. Jacob fought hard, but his injuries were too severe. On the 3rd night, with winter's first snowflakes beginning to fall, he took his last breath. Mary Rose was now alone on the prairie with a 7-year-old daughter and winter approaching fast. Everything they owned was gone except for one horse that had somehow survived the fire. She had no food, no shelter, and no money. The nearest town was 40 miles away through dangerous territory, but staying wasn't an option. Annie had started coughing, and Mary Rose feared she was getting sick. Without proper food and warmth, they wouldn't survive the winter. She made the hardest decision of her life. They would have to leave everything behind and try to reach civilization. On a cold morning in late October, Mary Rose loaded their surviving horse with what little they had left. A few pieces of clothing, some dried meat, and a small pot were all that remained of their life on the plains. She wrapped Annie in Jacob's old coat and helped her onto the horse as they rode away from the blackened ruins of their home. Mary Rose looked back one last time. This had been their dream, their future, their whole world. Now it was nothing but ash and memories. But she had to be strong for Annie. She had to find a way to survive. The journey ahead would take them through unfamiliar territory at a time when tensions between settlers and native tribes were running high. Stories of attacks and raids filled the newspapers in town. Most people warned against traveling alone, especially a woman with a child. But Mary Rose had no choice. On the first day they made good progress. The weather was cold but clear, and the horse seemed strong enough for the journey. Annie rode quietly, still shocked by everything that had happened. She asked about her father several times, and Mary Rose did her best to comfort her without breaking down herself, but by the second day things started to go wrong. A winter storm moved in faster than expected, bringing snow and freezing wind. Annie's cough got worse and she developed a fever. Mary Rose had no medicine and no way to keep her daughter warm enough. They took shelter under a group of trees, but the snow kept falling. Mary Rose used her own coat to wrap Annie, leaving herself exposed to the cold. She knew they couldn't stay there long, but Annie was too sick to travel. The horse was getting weak from the cold and lack of food. As night fell on the second day, Mary Rose realized they might not make it. She was lost, alone, and running out of hope. Annie's fever was getting worse, and she was barely conscious. Mary Rose held her daughter close and prayed for a miracle. She didn't know that help was coming from an unexpected source. Somewhere in the darkness, a Cheyenne warrior was tracking their movements, watching and waiting. Soon, their paths would cross in a way that would change both their lives forever. Running Wolf had been tracking the deer for 3 days. The animal was smart, always staying just out of range of his arrows. But patience was something his people had taught him well. He moved silently through the forest, his moccasined feet making no sound on the frozen ground. As a respected warrior of the Cheyenne people, Running Wolf was known for his hunting skills and his wisdom. At 32 years old, he had earned his place among the tribal council through countless battles and successful hunts. But today, something felt different. The spirits seemed to be guiding him away from his prey and toward something else entirely. The winter had been harsh, and his people needed meat. Their camp was hidden in a valley about 10 miles from where he now stood, protected by tall pine trees and rocky cliffs. The women and children were counting on him and the other hunters to bring back food. But as he followed the deer tracks, he noticed something that made him stop. Human footprints. Fresh ones made by people wearing the heavy boots that white settlers used. Running Wolf knelt down and studied the tracks carefully. 2 people had passed this way recently, 1 adult and 1 child. The adult was carrying the child, and both sets of tracks showed signs of stumbling and weakness. Running Wolf's first instinct was to avoid these travelers. Relations between his people and the white settlers had been tense for years. There had been raids on both sides, broken treaties, and endless conflicts over land. Many of his warrior brothers believed that all white people were enemies who should be driven from their ancestral lands. But something about these tracks troubled him. They weren't heading toward any settlement or fort. Instead, they seemed to wander aimlessly through the forest, as if the travelers were lost. The child's footprints disappeared completely after a while, meaning the adult was now carrying the little one. This wasn't the pattern of hostile invaders. This was the desperate flight of people in trouble. Running Wolf followed the tracks for about a mile. The trail led to a small clearing beside a frozen stream, and what he saw there made his heart heavy. A woman sat slumped against a fallen tree, holding a small child in her arms. Both were unconscious, and snow had begun to cover their still. Forms. He approached carefully, his hand resting on his knife. Even unconscious, white settlers could be dangerous? But as he got closer, he realized these two posed no threat to anyone. The woman was young, probably in her 20s, with brown hair that had come loose from its braid. Her clothes were torn and dirty, and her lips were blue from the cold. The child in her arms was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old. She was burning with fever, and her breathing was shallow and quick. Running Wolf touched the child's forehead and felt the dangerous heat of serious illness. Without help, both mother and child would be dead before morning. Running Wolf stepped back and considered his options. He could simply walk away and pretend he had never seen them. After all, white settlers had brought nothing but trouble to his people. They had taken the land, killed the buffalo, and broken every promise they had ever made. Why should he risk his own safety to help them? But as he looked at the unconscious child, memories flooded back. 2 years ago, he had lost his own wife and infant son to a cavalry raid. Soldiers had attacked their peaceful camp at dawn, killing women and children without mercy. His wife, Gentle Rain, had died trying to protect their baby boy. Running Wolf had held his son's lifeless body and sworn that he would never trust a white person again. Yet here was another child, dying in the cold just as his own son had died in his arms. The little girl's face reminded him of his lost boy. The same innocent features, the same helpless vulnerability. Could he really walk away and let another child die, even if she was white? Running Wolf's war party was camped about 2 miles away. 4 other warriors had come on this hunting expedition, and they were already suspicious of his long absence. If he brought white settlers back to their camp, there would be serious consequences. Some of his brothers had lost family members to white violence, and they would see his actions as betrayal, but the child was dying. Running Wolf could see it in her pale skin and labored breathing. He was not just a warrior, he was also a medicine man, trained in the healing arts by his grandmother. He knew herbs and treatments that could save this little girl's life. The question was whether he was willing to risk everything to do it. The woman stirred slightly, and Running Wolf saw that she was trying to protect her daughter even in unconsciousness. Her arms were wrapped tightly around the child, and she was using her own body to shield the little one from the wind. This was a mother's love, and it looked exactly the same, whether the skin was white or red. Running Wolf made his decision. He couldn't save his own son, but maybe he could save this one. He gently lifted the child from her mother's arms and was shocked by how light she was. The fever had burned away much of her strength, and she felt fragile as a bird in his hands. The woman's eyes fluttered open as he lifted her daughter. For a moment she stared at him in confusion and fear. Here was a Cheyenne warrior, painted for war, holding her sick child. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Her lips were too cracked and dry from dehydration. Running Wolf looked into her eyes and saw something he hadn't expected, not hatred or fear, but desperate hope. She was a mother watching her child die, and she was willing to trust anyone who might be able to help. In that moment, he saw past the color of her skin to the human heart beneath. He helped the woman to her feet, supporting her with one arm while holding the child with the other. She was too weak to walk far, but she managed to stumble along beside him. They moved slowly through the forest, the warrior and the settler woman, united only by their shared desire to save a dying child. As they traveled, Running Wolf found himself thinking about the choice he had made. His war party would be angry. His tribal council might question his judgment. Some of his people might even consider him a traitor for helping white settlers. But every time he looked at the sick child in his arms, he knew he had made the right decision. The camp was still several miles away, and night was falling fast. The temperature was dropping, and the woman was struggling to keep up. Running Wolf knew they might not make it in time. But he also knew that sometimes the spirits put tests in a man's path to see what kind of person he truly was. Tonight, he would find out if he was the kind of man who could save a life, even when it belonged to someone his people considered an enemy. The child's breathing grew more labored with each step, and running Volf quickened his pace. There was no time to lose. The first thing Mary Rose noticed when she woke up was warmth. Real warmth, not the bitter cold that had been numbing her body for days. She opened her eyes slowly and found herself lying on soft buffalo hides inside what looked like a large tent. The walls were made of animal skins stretched over wooden poles, and a small fire burned in the center of the space. She tried to sit up, but her body felt weak and heavy. That's when she remembered Annie. Where was her daughter? Panic shot through her as she looked around the unfamiliar space. Had she been captured? Was this some kind of prison, Annie? She whispered, her voice barely audible. From the shadows came a gentle voice speaking words she didn't understand. A woman emerged from the dim light, a Native American woman with kind eyes and long black hair braided with colorful beads. She was holding a wooden bowl filled with something that smelled like herbs and broth. Mary Rose's heart pounded. Everything she had heard about Indian raids flashed through her mind. Stories of settlers being taken captive, of families torn apart, of violence and revenge. But this woman didn't look threatening. She looked concerned. The woman knelt beside Mary Rose and offered her the bowl. When Mary Rose hesitated, the woman took a sip herself to show it was safe, then held it out again. Mary Rose's throat was so dry it hurt to swallow, so she accepted the warm liquid gratefully. It tasted strange but soothing, like nothing she had ever tried before. "My daughter," Mary Rose managed to say, pointing around the tent. "Little girl." "Where is she?" The woman seemed to understand. She pointed to the other side of the tent where Mary Rose could now see a small figure lying under thick furs. Annie was there, alive, though she looked terribly pale and thin. Mary Rose tried to get up to go to her daughter, but the woman gently pushed her back down. She pointed to Mary Rose, then to herself, then made a gesture that seemed to say, "Rest." Mary Rose wanted to argue, but her body had no strength left over the next few hours. Mary Rose watched in amazement as the woman cared for Annie. She brought different herbs and teas, carefully spooning small amounts into the child's mouth. She placed damp cloths on Annie's forehead to cool her fever and sang soft songs in her native language that somehow sounded like lullabies. The woman's name, Mary Rose learned through gestures and broken attempts at communication, was something that sounded like Star Woman. She was the sister of the warrior who had found them, the man Mary Rose remembered seeing in the forest before everything went black. Star Woman had been suspicious of Mary Rose at first. Her brother had brought white settlers into their camp, something that went against everything their people believed was safe. Many of their tribe had suffered at the hands of white soldiers and settlers. Her own husband had been killed in a raid just 3 years earlier, but as Star Woman watched Mary Rose's desperate concern for her sick daughter, she began to see past the color of her skin. This was a mother's love, pure and simple. It was the same love Star Woman had felt for her own children, the same protective instinct that lived in the heart of every woman, regardless of race. Running Volf came to check on them several times each day. He would examine Annie with the skilled hands of a medicine man, mixing new herbs and adjusting her treatment. Mary Rose could see the knowledge in his eyes. He knew about healing in ways that amazed her. At first, Mary Rose was afraid of him. He was a warrior, painted and dressed for battle, representing everything her people had taught her to fear. But as she watched him gently care for Annie, she began to see something different. His hands were gentle when he touched the child's forehead to check her fever. His voice was soft when he spoke to Star Woman about the treatments. Communication between them was difficult but not impossible. Running Volf knew a few English words and Mary Rose tried to learn some Cheyenne phrases. They used hand gestures, drawings in the dirt, and simple demonstrations to share information. Mary Rose learned that Running Volf had lost his own wife and child to a cavalry attack. When he told her this story, using a mixture of English words and gestures, she saw pain in his eyes that matched her own grief over losing Jacob. They had both lost everything to the violence that seemed to follow wherever white settlers and native people met. As the days passed, Annie's fever began to break. The herbs and constant care were working. Mary Rose watched her daughter's cheeks slowly regain some color, and her breathing became easier. It was like watching a miracle happen during Annie's recovery. Mary Rose began to learn about the life of these people who had saved them. She discovered that Star Woman was incredibly skilled at many things. She could turn animal hides into soft, warm clothing, preserve meat so it would last all winter, and create beautiful beadwork that told stories of their people. Star Woman taught Mary Rose how to prepare the traditional foods they ate: dried meat mixed with berries and fat, roots that could be ground into flour, and teas made from various plants. Some of it tasted strange to Mary Rose at first, but she was grateful for anything that would give her strength. In return, Mary Rose tried to help with the work around the camp. She wasn't very good at the traditional women's tasks at first. Her stitching was clumsy compared to Star Woman's skilled needlework, and she didn't know which plants were safe to gather. But she was eager to learn and willing to work hard. The other women in the camp watched Mary Rose with curious eyes. Some seemed friendly, while others kept their distance. Mary Rose understood their caution. She was a stranger from a people who had brought them nothing but trouble. But as they saw her working alongside Star Woman and caring for her sick daughter, some of their suspicion began to fade. Annie started to wake up more often, and when she did, she was fascinated by everything around her. She had never seen a tipi before, never tasted the foods these people ate, never heard their language or seen their clothes. But children adapt quickly, and soon she was trying to copy the words Star Woman taught her. One evening, as Mary Rose sat by the fire mending a torn piece of clothing, she realized something had changed inside her. For the first time since Jacob's death, she felt part of a community again. These people had welcomed her and her daughter when they had nowhere else to go. They had shared their food, their medicine, and their warmth with strangers who had every reason to be their enemies. Running Wolf sat down beside her, and they talked quietly while Annie slept. He told her about his people's way of life, about how they followed the buffalo herds and lived in harmony with the land. Mary Rose told him about her life on the farm, about the dreams she and Jacob had shared, and about the fire that had destroyed everything. As winter deepened around them, Mary Rose began to understand that she was experiencing something rare and precious, a bridge between two worlds that were supposed to be enemies. In caring for each other, they had found something that wars and treaties couldn't create: genuine human connection. But spring would come eventually, and with it, difficult choices. The outside world hadn't disappeared, and the conflicts between their peoples continued to rage. Soon, Mary Rose would have to decide what kind of future she wanted for herself and Annie. Snow fell steadily outside the tipi as Mary Rose worked on a pair of moccasins for Annie. Her fingers had grown more skilled over the past month, and Star Woman nodded approvingly at her neat stitches. The winter evenings had become a time for learning, and Mary Rose found herself looking forward to these quiet hours when the day's work was done. Running Wolf entered the tipi, shaking snow from his heavy coat. He had been out with the other men, checking the horses and making sure the camp was secure. The winter had been harsh, with more snow than usual, but their people were surviving well. The stored food would last until spring, and the tipis were warm and dry. "The storm will pass by morning," he said in English, his accent heavy but his words clear. Over the past weeks, their language lessons had become a daily ritual. Mary Rose would teach him English words while he shared Cheyenne phrases with her. Annie had picked up the language much faster than her mother, chattering away with the other children as if she had been born to it. "Annie learned a new song today," Mary Rose said, smiling as she watched her daughter play with a doll made of corn husks and dressed in tiny beaded clothes. Star Woman taught her about the changing seasons. Running Wolf sat down beside the fire, and Mary Rose noticed how natural it had become to have him there. In her old life, she would never have. Imagine sitting comfortably with a Cheyenne warrior, sharing stories and learning from each other. But that life felt like a distant dream now. "Tell me about your seasons," Running Wolf said. "How did your people mark the passing of time?" Mary Rose set down her sewing and thought about the question. We planted crops in spring, worked in the fields all summer, harvested in autumn, and rested in winter. But we always stayed in the same place. I never knew people could move with the seasons the way your tribe does. My grandmother used to say that the earth is our mother, Running Wolf replied. A good child does not stay in one room of the mother's house. We move where the grass is green, where the buffalo roam, where the spirits call us. These conversations have become precious to Mary Rose. Through them, she was learning about a completely different way of seeing the world. Running Wolf's people didn't think about owning land the way white settlers did. To them, the earth was something to be respected and shared, not something to be conquered and divided. As the weeks passed, Mary Rose began to notice changes in herself. The grief over Jacob's death was still there, but it had softened into something she could carry without being crushed by it. She was learning to find joy in small things again: Annie's laughter, the warmth of the fire, the satisfaction of completing a difficult task. But she was also becoming aware of something else, something that both thrilled and frightened her. She was developing feelings for Running Wolf that went beyond gratitude. She found herself looking forward to his visits, paying attention to the way he moved and spoke, feeling a flutter in her chest when he smiled at her. It wasn't just his kindness that attracted her, though that had been what first opened her heart to him. It was his intelligence, his wisdom, his gentle strength. He was a man who could be fierce in battle but tender with a sick child. He was someone who thought deeply about life and wasn't afraid to question the hatred that divided their peoples. One evening, as they sat by the fire teaching each other words from their languages, their hands accidentally touched as they reached for the same piece of wood. The moment of contact sent a shock through Mary Rose that had nothing to do with the cold. When she looked up, she saw something in Running Wolf's eyes that told her he felt it too, but the growing connection between them had not gone unnoticed by others in the camp. Some of the warriors had begun to question Running Wolf's judgment. They whispered that he was becoming too attached to the white woman, that his feelings might cloud his judgment when it came to protecting their people. Gray Bear, one of the older warriors, approached Running Wolf one morning while he was tending to the horses. "Brother," he said carefully, "the people are talking. They see how you look at the white woman. They wonder if you have forgotten what her people have done to us." Running Wolf's jaw tightened. "I have forgotten nothing. But I also remember that we judge individuals by their actions, not by the color of their skin. This woman has done nothing to harm us. She works beside our women, she cares for her child, she shows respect for our ways." "But she is still white," Gray Bear insisted. "When spring comes, she will return to her people. She will tell them about our camp, about our numbers, about our weaknesses. How can you trust someone whose loyalty must ultimately lie with our enemies?" These words troubled Running Wolf more than he cared to admit. He had been trying not to think about what would happen when the snow melted and travel became possible. Again, Mary Rose would have to make a choice: stay with people who had saved her life but were considered enemies by her own kind, or return to a world that would never accept her relationship with a Cheyenne warrior. Meanwhile, Mary Rose was facing her own internal struggles. She had begun to dream about a future that seemed impossible, a life where she could stay with Running Wolf, where Annie could grow up learning the wisdom of two cultures, where love could bridge the gap between their peoples. But she also knew the reality of the situation. If she stayed, she would be giving up any chance of ever being accepted by white society again. Annie would grow up as an outsider in both worlds, never fully belonging to either. And what about the danger? The conflicts between settlers and native tribes were growing worse, not better. Could she really risk Annie's safety for her own happiness? One night, as a blizzard raged outside, Mary Rose found herself alone with Running Wolf while Star Woman had taken Annie to visit with some of the other children. The intimacy of the moment was overwhelming. Just the two of them, the fire crackling softly, the world outside wild and dangerous, but their small space warm and safe. "I need to tell you something," Running Wolf said quietly. "When spring comes, there will be pressure from my people to send you away. They fear that your presence here will bring danger to our camp." Mary Rose felt her heart sink. I understand. I've always known this was temporary, but I don't want it to be temporary. Running Wolf continued, his voice barely above a whisper. You and Annie have brought something back to my life that I thought was lost forever. You've shown me that healing is possible, that love can grow even in the hardest ground. Mary Rose looked into his eyes and saw the same longing she felt in her own heart. I feel the same way. But what kind of future could we have? Your people would never fully accept me, and mine would consider me a traitor. I don't know, Running Wolf admitted. But I know that what we have found together is rare and precious. Maybe that's worth fighting for, even if the whole world stands against us. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, and Mary Rose realized that the storm was not just in the weather. Spring would bring difficult choices, dangerous journeys, and the possibility of losing everything she had come to love all over again. But for now, in this moment, she allowed herself to hope that love might be stronger than the forces trying to tear them apart. The first warm day of spring arrived like a gift from the spirits. Mary Rose stepped outside the tipi and felt the sun on her face for the first time in months. The snow was melting, creating little streams that carried the winter away. Birds were returning, and the air smelled of new grass and possibility, but with spring came the knowledge that decisions could no longer be delayed. Mary Rose had lived with Running Wolf's people for 5 months now, and she had become part of their community in ways she never thought possible. Annie spoke Cheyenne as fluently as English, and she had friends among the tribal children who treated her like family. Yet Mary Rose knew that the outside world had not forgotten about them. Sooner or later, someone would come looking for the white woman and child who had disappeared during the winter. The question was whether they would come in peace or with weapons drawn. The answer came on a bright morning in early April. One of the young warriors who had been hunting came racing back to camp with urgent news. "Soldiers!" he shouted. "Blue coats are coming from the east. They carry a white flag, but they are many." Running Wolf immediately called a council meeting. The tribal elders gathered in the center of the camp, while the women and children prepared for the worst. Everyone knew that white flags could be lies, and that soldiers had attacked peaceful camps before under the pretense of negotiation. How many? Asked Gray Bear, the war chief. Maybe 20 soldiers, the young warrior replied. They have an officer riding in front, and they are moving slowly. They do not seem to be preparing for battle. Chief Standing Bear, an elderly man whose wisdom was respected by all, looked directly at Running Wolf. "This is about the white woman, isn't it? They have come to take her back?" Running Wolf nodded grimly. "I believe so. The question is what we do about it." Some of the warriors wanted to fight. They had suffered too much at the hands of white soldiers to trust any of them, regardless of flags or promises, but Chief Standing Bear was more cautious. "Fighting will only bring more soldiers," he said. "If we kill these men, their people will send 100 more to avenge them." Mary Rose had been listening from outside the council circle, as was proper for women. But when she heard the discussion turning toward violence, she knew she had to speak. She stepped forward, her heart pounding with fear and determination. "I should go to them," she said quietly. "If they've come for me, then I'm the one who should face them." The council fell silent. It was unusual for a woman to speak in such a gathering, and even more unusual for that woman to be white. But Mary Rose had earned a place of respect during her time with the tribe, and they listened to her words. "If I go with them willingly," she continued, "there will be no need for fighting. No one will be hurt." Running Wolf stood up quickly. "No, I won't let you sacrifice yourself to protect us. We can find another way." "What other way?" Mary Rose asked, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "If I stay, you'll always be in danger. Other soldiers will come, and eventually someone will get hurt. I can't live with that responsibility." The sound of approaching horses interrupted their discussion. The soldiers were close now, and there was no more time for debate. Chief Standing Bear made the decision for everyone. "We will meet them at the edge of camp," he said. "Running Wolf, you will translate." The white woman will decide for herself what she wants to do. Mary Rose felt her legs trembling as they walked toward the approaching soldiers. Annie held her hand tightly, sensing the tension in the air. The little girl had no idea that her entire world might be about to change again. The soldiers stopped, about 50 yards from the camp. Their leader, a captain with graying hair and tired eyes, dismounted and walked forward with his hands visible. He was trying to show that he came in peace, but Mary Rose could see the other soldiers keeping their weapons ready. "I'm Captain Wilson," the officer called out. "I'm looking for Mrs. Mary Rose McKenna and her daughter Annie. We've been sent to bring them home safely." Mary Rose stepped forward, her heart breaking with each step. "I am Mary Rose McKenna. This is my daughter." Captain Wilson's face showed relief but also confusion. The woman before him looked healthy and unharmed. Her clothes were different, made in the native style, but she seemed to be there by choice rather than as a prisoner. "Ma'am, we've come to take you back to civilization," the captain said carefully. "The whole territory has been searching for you since the fire. People thought you were dead." "As you can see, I'm very much alive," Mary Rose replied. "These people saved my life and my daughter's life. We would have died in the winter if not for their kindness." The captain looked around at the Cheyenne warriors who surrounded them, trying to understand the situation. That's good to hear, ma'am. But surely you want to return to your own people now? We can escort you safely to the nearest town." Mary Rose felt Running Wolf's presence beside her, though he hadn't said a word. She could sense his pain, his fear that she would leave him forever. Annie tugged at her mother's dress, confused by the strange men and the tension in the air. "Captain," Mary Rose said slowly, "what would happen if I chose to stay here?" The officer's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Ma'am, you can't seriously be considering living with Indians. It's not safe, and it's not proper. You have a daughter to think about." "My daughter has been safer here than anywhere else," Mary Rose replied firmly. "She's learned things no white school could teach her. She's seen kindness from people you would call enemies." The captain's patience was wearing thin. "Mrs. McKenna, I have orders to bring you back. The territorial government can't have white women choosing to live with hostile tribes. It sets a bad example." "Hostile?" Mary Rose felt anger rising in her chest. "These people nursed my daughter back to health when she was dying. They shared their food, their shelter, their wisdom. If that's hostile, then I pray more people would be so hostile." Running Wolf finally spoke, his English careful but clear. "Captain, the woman is free to choose. We do not hold prisoners here. If she wants to go with you, she may go. If she wants to stay, she may stay." The captain looked frustrated. "And you, sir, what is your interest in this matter?" Running Wolf straightened his shoulders and looked the officer in the eye. "Mary Rose is my wife. Annie is my daughter now. This is my family." A murmur went through the soldiers at this declaration. Some of them put their hands on their weapons, as if the very idea of a white woman marrying an Indian was a threat that needed to be eliminated. Mary Rose felt a surge of courage at Running Wolf's words. He had claimed her publicly, despite the danger it might bring to both of them. Now it was her turn to be brave. "Captain Wilson," she said, her voice steady and strong, "I am grateful that you came looking for me, but I will not be returning. With you, my place is here, with my husband and his people. Annie and I have found a new home, and we intend to stay." The captain's face reddened. "Ma'am, I cannot allow you to make such a foolish decision. Think of your reputation, your future, your daughter's future. What kind of life can you have here?" "Life filled with love, respect, and community," Mary Rose replied. "These people have shown me what it means to truly belong somewhere. I won't give that up to return to a world that would judge me for choosing love over fear." What followed was a tense standoff that lasted for hours. The captain argued, threatened, and pleaded, but Mary Rose stood firm. She had made her choice, and she would not be swayed. Finally, as the sun began to set, Captain Wilson realized he had no legal authority to force a white woman to leave if she truly wanted to stay. With great reluctance, he ordered his men to mount up. "This won't be the end of it," he warned. Other officials will come. The territorial government won't stand for this. Then they will find us ready, Running Wolf replied calmly. As the soldiers rode away, Mary Rose felt a mixture of relief and fear. She had chosen love over safety, community over conformity. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them, with Running Wolf beside her and Annie in her arms. That night, as the tribe celebrated her decision with songs and stories, Mary Rose looked up at the stars and felt truly free for the first time in her life. She had found her place in the world, and no amount of pressure from either side would make her give it up.